Hi everyone, Orit here. How are you? Happy Thursday. Hello. For those of you who don't know me yet, my name is Orit Gately. I am the founder, education coach, and advocate here at the Advocate Corner. So I'm so glad that you are here with us today. Today we're talking about a very interesting topic, but before we even delve into that, what I wanted to share with you is what do I do? Okay, those of you who might be new, not sure about what I'm about. I'm an educator over 20, God knows how many years. I've been an educator, both a teacher, a district and building level administrator, and I've learned a lot over the years. And not only have I been very passionate about ensuring that I am supporting my students, my parents, but I also I noticed over the years that how often parents are struggling and parents are having a very difficult time navigating the education system. So what I'm here doing and what my mission is to help parents who do feel lost and overwhelmed within the education system to be able to help them advocate for themselves, and for their unique learning needs of the child, because our children are so precious to us, right? And if they're so precious to us, how are we helping them become the best learner and achieve what things that they want to achieve in life, right? And unless we advocate for them, it's really hard for us to ensure that they are doing everything that they can to succeed in school. So that's my mission. That's really what I'm about. It's a passion, and it's been a passion for over 20 years for me. So again, before we dive in, I just want to put a little disclaimer because of today's topic. It is a very hot topic in a lot of school districts. With a lot of parents. So I just want to make sure that everyone's aware that the information in this event, in this Facebook Live, is really for the information purposes only. This is not to be taken as legal advice. It's not a situation where, this goes across the board. Every district has its own processes, it has its own requirements, and it has its own resources. So it's really important to take those into account when we are talking about today's topic. Also, by law, districts must provide FAPE, which is free and appropriate public education for every child in their care. Yet how they provide it is based on individual needs, okay, as well as multiple other factors that may not be discussed today. So that's what I just wanted to put it out there, that, there are so many factors impacting how a child learns, what supports they receive. But today I do want to touch upon that hot topic of what happens when a school district refuses a one-to-one aid for a child. Now, I've seen this come up not just in conversations with parents, but I've also seen them on the social media boards and in various groups where parents are, trying to advocate for a one-to-one aid for their child. And there is a difference between an aide and a teaching assistant in a classroom. But they're advocating and they are frustrated. They are furious. They are so angry with feeling like I'm not being listened to and my kid needs a one-on-one, and they just don't know, or, and it's okay, because it's okay not to know what you don't know as to why the school's refusing this. Some districts, and districts, not some, every district by law does need to provide a written reason for why they are refusing certain services or certain accommodations. Okay, so that does need to be put in writing, and it's called a prior written notice in most districts. But let's kind of talk about why would they refuse it. And I've seen it happen multiple times, not just as a teacher, but I've seen it as an administrator, and I'm seeing it now as an education coach and advocate. So let's just talk a little bit about what is the importance of a one-to-one aid. What do they actually do? One-to-one aids do play a crucial role in supporting students with certain unique needs. Now, they do provide personalized attention, ensure safety, and promote inclusive education for the child in order to be able to access FAPE. However, school districts can sometimes hesitate to provide one-to-one aides for various reasons. And today I'm just going to touch upon what I think are the top three. Some people might say, no, that's not one of the top reasons, but for me, this is what I'm touching upon today. Okay. So let's go into the first reason. The first reason why schools may refuse or districts might refuse a one-to-one aide is that the medical need of the child is not significant enough. And so I'll tell you a little bit about what does that mean. Medical needs for children do play a crucial role in determining the necessity of a one-to-one aide. Now, just because a child has a medical need, we need to make sure that that medical need does not interrupt their access to FAPE, right? Mentioning to the district and mentioning to the district that there is a medical need, the district then has to assess, and the doctors would also help assess the severity and the impact of that medical need of a student's condition, right? So they would have to assess it and see whether or not their medical need does require a one-to-one aide. And I'm going to go into, so what are some of those examples, right? What does that medical need mean? Because parents sometimes feel like, well, my child is on the autism spectrum disorder. My child has attention deficit. My child has anxiety. Does that actually mean the medical need? All right. And I've noticed a lot of parents are not always aware of what that means. All right. So one of the examples is severe physical disabilities. So what does that mean? Students with severe physical disabilities, right, are wheelchair bound. They might be children who have severe physical limited mobilities to be able to get around school. They might have a hard time navigating the school. They might have needing special access to specialized equipment as well. So that's where the aide would come in and help support that. Now, the aide can provide physical support. They can also help with daily activities, getting to and from school, from classrooms, and they ensure the student's safety throughout the school day. What does that mean? If there's ever an exit drill or a fire drill, that student needs the support of a one-to-one aide in order to be able to get out of the building safely. So an example, when I was a building administrator, we had a child in the building who had limited mobility with the legs. The child was able to walk on their own, but very slowly and very inconsistently because they had a habit of falling due to their physical needs, or physical limitation, I should say, but I don't like to use the word limitations. Different abilities, let's say it that way. And in order for this child to move from class to class, in order for this child to safely get out of the building, in order for this child to safely participate in outdoor activities or physical education activities, they did have adaptive PE, but the child had to have a one-on-one aide in order to help them. And so if your child has a medical need but can function in a classroom on their own, in whether, let's just talk physically, that may not constitute a need for an aide, okay? The other reason when we're talking about physical needs is we're looking at life-threatening medical conditions. So what do those mean for school districts? In some school districts, and a lot of them actually, if a child has a colostomy bag, when children are walking around with colostomy bags, that is a life-threatening medical condition. And so they will need that one-to-one aide to help them. Epilepsy or severe seizures, consistent frequency seizures, those are times where one-to-one aides would be needed. If a child is diabetic and they have something where they need the insulin provided, or there's some diabetic need that they have to be able to test themselves throughout the day, those are reasons for one-to-one aides in some schools. So another story is we did have a child, again, when I was an assistant principal, we had a child with a colostomy bag. Not only did the child have a colostomy bag, but they also had some limited mobility. Due to that in and of itself, because it's a life-threatening condition and limited mobility, the child automatically qualified for a one-to-one aid. Okay, so when we're looking at reasons why a school might refuse it, if your child does not have severe medical needs, that's most likely why your child may not be getting that one-to-one aid. Now, sometimes aides can be trained to support the medical conditions, to monitor certain vital signs. If they are trained to do it, they all have to be trained for this type of work. All right, so let's continue. The next medical need. There are going to be potential challenges when parents may face when advocating for a one-to-one aid based on a medical need. Okay. The reason I'm bringing this up is that I've heard a lot of parents say, well, my child has severe ADHD, severe anxiety, and they need a one-to-one aid to help them focus. Yet there are other things that a district can do in order to mitigate the needs of in order to help the child, not even mitigate, but in order to help the child access FAPE that does not require that one-to-one aid. Okay. So one of the things that if you truly feel in your mama gut that no, this medical condition or situation that my child has does need a one-to-one aid, then you have to look at the medical documentation to support your claim. That medical documentation is going to help you with your advocacy. Okay. When you don't have that medical documentation, then it's going to be tougher to advocate. The other thing is you have to be so comprehensive with your medical records and assessments. They have to be super comprehensive in order for the district to say, okay, we have everything we need here, that we can't refuse the one-to-one aid. So you really have to look at that comprehension of the assessment and how extensive those medical records go. All right. So let's look at reason number 2. What's another reason why they might refuse a one-to-one aid? And I've seen this happen many times. Lack of documentation. When a parent doesn't have the appropriate documentation, which kind of connects to what we were just talking about with the medical records, when a parent doesn't have that medical documentation or lack of documentation, that can hinder the approval of one-to-one aid. Think of it like a lawyer. If I don't have the evidence to support my claim, then how am I going to prove that this is what my child needs? Okay, so I just want to make sure that you're aware of that. Now, it is very important to have clear and comprehensive documentation of a student's needs, because maybe it's not the one-to-one aid that you would get, yet there are other things you can get that you might not even be aware that you can get that can support your child's learning. And I'll go into that a little further when we get to reason number 3. So think of not just the documentation, but maybe the documentation that you have from the medical documentation, medical professionals, psychological documentation, or educational evaluations. They might not be up to date. If they're not up to date, most often you are going to get refused a one-to-one aid. Why? Because schools look at present levels of performance, right? So if the documentation was from 2 years ago and you're advocating for an aid today, well, you have to have today's or, within the past week or a month documentation to show this is why my child needs the aid, right? So districts are always going to look at present levels of performance to see and to determine what supports a child needs. Then other things you want to think about is when you're starting this process and you might think down the line, my kid might need an aid, a one-to-one, start organizing and gathering the documents now. You want to show patterns and trends over time. Why? Because districts do like to say, well, let's wait and see what happens in the coming year, right? Or in the coming months. But when you're able to show patterns and show how those patterns impact the child's present levels of performance, then you're saying, oh, okay, I see how this is going. Districts can then know and see how the data is creating a stronger picture for the child. All right, so that's why that lack of documentation is going to impact a district's approval for a one-to-one aid. And remember, kids' progress changes over time, right? So they may have needed it last year, a one-to-one aid, which would have been useful. Now you're thinking they need the one-to-one aid, but because progress had changed, the district's going to say, no, they don't need the one-to-one aid right now. All right. So what can you do? We'll talk about it now in reason number 3. But another reason why districts would negate and would say no to a one-to-one aid is the least restrictive environment. So the least restrictive environment is the environment in which the child can perform best with the least restrictions on them in order to enter their free and appropriate public education, right? To enter their learning. So LRE is the terminology. It's the little abbreviation we use for least restrictive environment. So LRE is a legal requirement to provide education, okay, in the least restrictive setting. Districts consider alternative supports and accommodations before even providing a one-to-one aid. And because they're considering alternative supports and accommodations, they are going to refuse a one-to-one aid because they will try other avenues to provide the free and appropriate education. The district does aim to balance the student's individual needs with inclusion in a general education setting. Now, some districts do have inclusion classes. Sometimes they're called co-teaching classes. So this is where I wanted to kind of touch base on, well, if the district is telling me that my child is in a general education classroom and they're not going to provide a one-to-one aid because of whatever reasons, they want to try other alternatives and other accommodations. Now you want to think, not even creatively, but now you want to know, well, what can be done, right, to provide my child the support that they need to access their learning. So this is where you really want to think about, is there a co-teaching classroom? A co-teaching classroom is where there's a special education teacher and a general education teacher teaching together in the classroom, and they can help and support the children. I mean, what better opportunity than to have 2 teachers in the classroom versus 1? And that's a great way to be able to support all the needs of kids when you have those 2 teachers. General education kids benefit from the special education teacher. They don't get serviced by them, but they can benefit from listening in because they're in the classroom, right? And vice versa with the children who are a co-teaching class, who are special education children. They are going to be getting the instruction not just from the gen ed teacher, but they're also getting the instruction from the special education teacher. So it really gives them that extra services and supports. In some cases, and I'll tell you a little bit of story about my situation, in some cases, a teaching assistant is assigned to possibly 3 to 4, maybe even 5 kids, depending on their IEPs and what their IEP says in the classroom, who also receive special education services outside of the classroom or might have a push-in. Okay, so it depends again on the model of the school and the programs that the districts provide of special education. So my own experience when I was a 5th grade cluster teacher many moons ago, I had children in my classroom. I was, in the classroom with children who were general education kids, children on the autism spectrum. They were in the level 1. Yes, they were on the level 1, high functioning, but still needed supports. I had children with dyslexia in the class. I had children with processing disorders, children with learning disabilities and severe learning disabilities. For example, one child I had was a 5th grader. She was an older 5th grader, meaning she was born towards the beginning of the year, who read on a 1st grade level. And she was given a teaching assistant, not a one-to-one aid, right? So here, where I had been working as the classroom teacher, I had a teaching assistant who I paired with and worked with, And she was able to provide support for the 3, 4, 5 kids, depending on what group we had that year. She was able to provide the support for the kids. So that's another way that the child might not receive one-to-one aid, but they can receive a small group instruction within the general ed setting, because that was the least restrictive environment for those kids. Now, in this type of situation, and this is where I do want to make it very clear, in these kind of situations, differentiating the instruction by the head teacher in the classroom is what's going to be the most important, because there are multi-tiered systems of supports in schools. Okay. And I go into that in my modules. But when you have multi-tiered systems of supports and you have a teaching assistant in the classroom, you then, as the head teacher in the class, can differentiate your instruction to help all the children access the learning in the way that works best for them. And one of the big topics I talk about in my modules is what is differentiated instruction, and how do you know the type of instruction your child might need versus getting the one-to-one aid. Okay, so we'll go over that on a different time. So again, there's frustration. And I get it. As a parent myself, as an educator, I get the frustration that parents face when they want a one-to-one for their child and they might not receive it and they're fighting for it. I get it. Knowing how to advocate, whether it's for that or another way for your kid to access the learning, whether it's accommodations or different supports, that's the key right there. That's the key we want to take, unlock, and figure out and open that door for you and for your child, right? So this is where having that open communication with your child's school, collaborating with the child's team, which parents sometimes are not sure how to do, and that's okay. And that's what we talk about here at the Advocate Corner, is how do we do that? Collaborating with them is going to really help you understand, how can I get my kid the support they need if the district's refusing one-to-one aid for my kid? All right. And involving advocates or even professionals experienced in special ed law. And a lot of times those are going to be the lawyers who are going to maybe fight for your child to get that aid. Yet you want to, again, make sure that you are trying everything possible before you have to pay for the lawyers, before relationships and situations with your district become contentious. Okay. So that's where advocates could be super helpful. That's where knowing what you need to know to best advocate for your child can be helpful. Getting an education coach could be helpful so that you are empowered. Because, and I say this all the time to my mommies, moms, you are the expert on your child. You really are. So when you are the expert, how are we helping you show up to advocate for your kid in an empowered way, right? Because when you do that, magic happens. And I've seen it with my clients over and over and over again. They are getting the results they want because they know how to advocate for their child. Okay, so just to summarize, the top 3 reasons why a district might refuse your child's one-to-one. The medical need might not be significant enough. And again, that goes by district, district to district. There could be lack of documentation that you might not be providing, that you're thinking, I have everything. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, I needed maybe another piece of document, or it's too old. And then the least restrictive environment and what could be done in that environment to help your child before a one-to-one aid is needed. All right. Now, a lot of districts do say we don't have the resources. Okay. That's probably one of the top one. But I argue there that districts have resources. Okay. So that's why I didn't put it in my top 3, because districts have resources. And if the child needs a one-to-one because it's on their IEP, then that district has to provide it. but it's how do you get there? That's the most important part. Okay. So thank you for joining me today. I'm glad you're here. I try to keep these short because we're busy moms and dads. Pop in, pop out, get the information you need. But of course, if you have any questions, please shoot me a DM message here at the Advocate Corner parent group. You can send me an email at orit@theadvocatecorner.com. You can also, if you want, absolutely book a free session today to ensure that you are getting your child's needs met. And especially this summer, you might have some extra time. You might want to get some learning done this summer so you can advocate for your kid next year. Thank you for joining me. I wanted to thank you for your time, and I hope to see you next week. All right. Be well, everyone. Bye.